In this video, I'm going to show how the font editor can also be used to edit animated sprites, define frames and animations, and how to use 3D text to then draw these animated sprites. On the main menu, toggle Sprite Mode on the bottom left. The first slot will now only accept objects that have animated sprite as a component. So let's make one. Start with a sprite sheet. I'm using sprites of Alucard from Symphony of the Night. Credit to Konami. Adjust the import settings of the texture to Advanced. Turn on Read Write. Make it true colour to prevent artifacts. It's important to keep the sprite map having sizes of the powers of 2, or you will get resampling artifacts. Create a new 3D text object. As this editor deals with fonts, the sprites are really just letters in disguise. Reset the transform and change the text to a single exclamation mark. Create a prefab in your directory. Drop the 3D text into the prefab and then delete it from the scene. Now apply the animated sprite script as a component. The script has two assignable variables, sprite material and animations. Create a material and put the sprite map onto it. Change the shader to the textured text shader and put the material into the component variable. The animation property takes fonts, so create some custom font assets. I'm calling this one Setup Idle, and this will contain the idle animation. I have 9 animations in total on this sprite sheet, so I will need 9 fonts. Idle, Run, Stop, Turn, Crouch, Uncrouch, Jump, Land, and Fall. Put all of these into the animation array in the sprite component. Now start the editor and drop the sprite prefab into the slot and click Start. The editor will show the sprite sheet. To define a frame, click the +1 button. Drag the rect over a sprite. Add another. Note the numbers in the top left of the rect. This is the 0-based frame number, so the first frame in the animation is 0. Add a few more and move them over the sprites. Click Shrink Wrap to tighten up the rects. In the scene should be an object called SpriteSetter Preview Sprite. This object should be located at 000 in the scene. Here I'm creating a small cube at 000 to represent the pivot of the sprite object. The object itself is never moving. In the editor, every rect has a small pivot marker. Move the pivot marker to adjust where the sprite is drawn. Note, the actual sprite game object isn't moving, it's just changing where the sprite is being drawn in relation to its pivot. If you toggle on Auto Animate, you can see the sprite jumping around. This is because the pivots of all the current frames haven't been adjusted. When moved to appropriate positions, the animating sprite looks much more stable. To add frames for a different animation, click +1, move it to the right place, and on the left side, change which font this belongs to. As this is the first frame of the crouch animation, its index should be 0. Add a few more rects and shrink wrap them. Now another few rects for a different animation. Note the frame number is colour coded for each animation. Error prompts will use this same colour scheme. Setting all rects and pivots manually can be time consuming, so use the auto set. The editor will highlight a shape. You need to identify what frame it is, which animation it belongs to, and where the pivot is. Ignore pivot pixel for now, and just choose bottom center. Click Next, and the editor will highlight another. The index auto-increments, so just keep clicking Next. You can also press Enter to continue. When the setter gets to a different animation, change the font. The index should automatically 0. This particular sprite has some dust and the shapes aren't connected, so this shape is not actually a different frame. Click Skip to ignore it. You can also press Escape to ignore. Repeat this process for all sprites and animations. If you're ever adding frames to a font which already has frames added, the index should automatically change to the next lowest number. And done. On the right side is the animation properties. You can choose the animation from this list. You will also need to adjust the loop style as needed for each animation. For the idle animation, I want it to play once and then freeze on the last frame. For the run animation, I want it to loop, but if you toggle on auto animate, you can see that the first few frames of this animation are transition frames from idling into running. Although I want it to loop, I don't want it to keep playing this first few frames. The loop start frame controls which frame the loop starts. In this case it's 15. With this set, the animation now plays the initial transition and then only loops the running part. The stop animation is to transition from running to standing idle. The behaviour for this should be once and change, and below assign which animation it changes to, idle in this case. Turn is a transition that turns the character around into the running animation, so the behaviour is once and change, and set the change to run. But I don't want it to animate the run from those first 15 frames, so change starting at to 15. Crouch is a once and hold. When I select uncrouch, the console prints an error. There are currently no frames in the uncrouch animation. When I was auto-setting the rects, I forgot to change to uncrouch for these last 5 frames. Select them and change them to the correct animation. The error shown here says that the animation is missing index 0, i.e. the first frame. This is because when you change the animation, the indices aren't reset to 0. With one of the frames in this animation selected, click Fix Indices on the left to correct the frames. This button will also fix it if you have more than one frame with the same index. Uncrouch is a once and change to idle type. And continue setting the behaviour for all the animations.